Good evening, you all. Thank you, Francio, for the introduction, and thank you for honoring me the role of moderator and master of ceremony. And as Francio is a really strict dean of the University of St. Martin, he instructed me to keep track on time. So I have my cell phone ready. And as an educator, I'm really pleased to see a lot of students in this lecture, in this meeting, because I think the youth is our future. And please ask a lot of questions, listen very carefully to each perspective about this book, because I think it's worthwhile to have a real thorough dialogue on this. As I came to St. Martin about 2 years ago, I had the idea that why is St. Martin not an independent state? And it's so rare to see that this island has 2 nation states. So for me, the main question is why for tonight? And I learned a lot in these past 2 years, and I will learn a lot more tonight. But let me first introduce to you Mr. Jose Lake Jr. He is a senior media man and political scientist. He's a leading advocate of independence of St. Martin. Already in 1994, Mr. Lake became the founding president of the Independence for St. Martin Foundation, the first organization dedicated to the island's political independence. Mr. Lake is also the author of several essays and books. Amongst them are the book Friendly Anger, The Rise of the Labor Movement in St. Martin, and the book The Republic of St. Martin. And tonight we are talking about his most recent book, 6 for 9. Mr. Lake, I would like to invite you to come.
Hello. Good evening to everyone. Congratulations on being appointed as acting president. I think it's very nice. I would like to start with a quote from my book, The Republic of St. Martin, which was written, and this quote that I'm taking is from a document that was presented to the delegation of St. Martin in 1988, 26 years ago. And the quote, or the name of the document, which was presented by the Cabinet for the Netherlands, Antilles, and Aruban Affairs, which is a Dutch cabinet. And the document states, broad overview of the tasks necessary to realize the independence of St. Martin in a responsible manner. This document was presented by the members of the Dutch Kingdom in 1988, 26 years ago. If the actions in this document was taken, today we would not be having to read 6 for 9, because St. Martin would have been independent at least 15, 20 years ago. The 6 for 9 book which I have here, I did it in this year, and I dedicated it to the people of St. Martin and to one of the, what you could call one of the most critical persons against the establishment in St. Martin in his time, which was Elvin van Putten. Many people might not remember Elvin, but I always wanted to do a document or book on both sides of St. Martin, the south and the north, which some people call French St. Martin, Dutch St. Martin. I don't call it that, because I believe St. Martin belongs to the people of St. Martin. And if you say French St. Martin, then that part belongs to the French. And you say Dutch St. Martin, that part belongs to the Dutch. And then I ask you which part belongs to St. Martin people. 6 for 9 came about because I wanted to do something on 21st century St. Martin. I think that's why the book became so appropriate and why it grabbed the attention of the population. Everything in 6 for 9 was put together in the 21st century St. Martin. I wanted to do something based on this century. And if you go through the book, you will see that all the quotations, all the statements, and everything is really 21st century stuff. And then when you analyze it, you will see, for instance, the collectivité was put together in this 21st century. Country St. Martin was put together in the 21st century. The statements that were made by the Prime Minister of St. Martin, for instance, that St. Martin is not in control of itself, that the political bosses in The Hague are the control, was put together this century. The statements by the first president of the collectivité, that also the people in the south, in the north, were taken advantage of and had nothing to do, was also put together in this century. So really 6 for 9 is the way St. Martin is today. To talk about the youngsters, the young people getting in crime, getting incarcerated, it's today. Everything. Then you go based on what we wrote concerning all the statements or the modern statements of putting St. Martin, the South, against the North, and having them compete against each other. It's all right here taking place today. But the main aspect of 6 for 9, when you study it, you will see something very interesting. The collectivité and the country St. Martin were not put together in the interest of the people of St. Martin. They were put together really in many ways to weaken the people of St. Martin. Because everything in those two books, all the St. Martin, you could take the position, is a Siamese twin. They are Siamese twins that everything is done to pull them apart and to weaken the population by, for instance, pointing out that the North is like a poor house and the South is a powerhouse. That the South lives off of the North by having the people in the North do all the business investment in the South, or that the people in the South depend on the people in the North for their medical attention. But everything, there is no drive, nothing is put together in these two to create the unity of the St. Martin people. Everything is done, you French, I Dutch, so I'm a French St. Martin, I'm a Dutch St. Martin, and the purpose of that is to continue to strengthen. As the collectivité strengthens, and as the country strengthens, the St. Martin people become weaker. The St. Martin people become weaker based on the strength of the collectivité and the country. Because the collectivité main objective as any colony is to serve the interests of its of the colonizer, who sits in Paris, or they sit in The Hague. We just recently realized that we heard some of the representatives of the colonial powers in Paris stating, because it's not in their interest, that they will put up a border between the North and the South. When you look at St. Martin and you realize of the Franco-Dutch Treaty, which was put again together to isolate St. Martin from the rest of the Caribbean, not St. Martin the island, but the St. Martin people. Because the whole objective of the Franco-Dutch Treaty was to make it almost impossible for Caribbean people to enter St. Martin. And the Franco-Dutch Treaty, for instance, which only applied to Juliana Airport and L'Espérance Airport were nevertheless in the preamble stated clearly that it was put together in the interest of the French Republic and the interest of the Dutch Kingdom. Nowhere did it talk about the interest of the people of St. Martin. So the glamour or the promotion that many people do of emphasizing that we have two nationalities, and some talk about us having 120 nationalities on the island. And some people are so proud that there's 120 nationalities on this island. But they never stop for 1 second to ask themselves, how come there's no St. Martin nationality on St. Martin? So you're proud of what is done here. Okay, so let me just put it this way. The only way for St. Martin to be able to work herself out of this situation, for St. Martin people, is for St. Martin people to take their destiny into their own hands. It's a known fact in the history of mankind that people who don't take their destiny into their own hands eventually disappear off the face of the earth. So if we as the St. Martin people, both from the north and the south, doesn't take our destiny into our hands and do what we have to do in order to ensure our very survival, we will also disappear in the future. The country and the collectivity might continue to exist, but the St. Martin people, the way we know them, will no longer exist.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. And for sure you have a lot of questions already, but just write them down. Remind for later on to ask questions. I would like now to introduce to you Mr. Reinhold Groeneveld. He's an attorney at law, and Mr. Reinhold Groeneveld was appointed by royal decree as the first acting governor of Sint Maarten. Mr. Groeneveld was a member for many years of various committees that advised government on the process of constitutional change. Mr. Groeneveld has been one of the many legal minds working on the Constitution from the inception. Mr. Groeneveld. You can come here if you want.
Thank you and good evening. And first of all, I would like to thank the university for organizing this forum and for inviting me to be here. I have a few reactions to the book. I think it's a wonderful, splendid work of art. I think it's a well-written book, easy to read, contains a lot of good information, gives good comparison and similarities between, as Mr. Lakes put it, between the North and the South. And it's a critical view on the status, the constitutional status here on the Dutch side, and the collectivité on the French side. And he brought out some information about the collectivité that I was not aware of, so I really have to thank him for that. But my final conclusion, looking at the status that we have here on the Dutch side, I will have to conclude, Mr. Lake, that we did not give the people a 6 for a 9. I think we have a very good structure here on the Dutch side of the island. We still have to get accustomed to it. And also, as I discussed with you on several occasions, I do not agree that we are a colony. We ceased from being a colony, I think it was in 1955. And even before that, from 1950, the colonial rule over the Netherlands Antilles ended. So we are definitely not a colony. A lot of people also been telling you that we are also not a country and we are not a state. And I definitely beg to differ. We are a country, we are a state, and later on in the evening, maybe I will get the opportunity to prove that to you, because I see my time is running away from me. But definitely we are more independent than we know or that we would believe, and I'm going to point that out. I do believe with you though that we should work towards becoming a totally sovereign, independent state. But still we have to use the word sovereign and independent between quotation marks. The question, however, would be when, how, and for what reasons, why? And I hope in the course of the evening, in the discussion, to continue to give my reaction and also share some information about my thoughts and the facts, the literature that I have with me, to the people. Thank you.
I do apologize for the alarm, but I think it will help. Thank you, Mrs. Groeneveld, for your response. I would like now to introduce to you Mrs. Daniela Jeffrey. She's an educator and historian, and Mrs. Daniela Jeffrey was the president of the Association Saint-Martin, People's Consensus, from 1990 to 1999, and she partly wrote and edited the publication. The Status for St. Martin, published in 2002. Mrs. Jeffrey was the former president and co-founder of the political party United St. Martin Movement from 1998 to 2003. She served as municipal councillor from 2001 to 2007, and Mrs. Jeffrey wrote many articles and lectures on the history, politics and culture of the people of St. Martin. And by the way, I also found out that you used to be a teacher, French and English, so I welcome my colleague, Mrs. Jeffrey.
Good evening, everybody. This is a house full, and I would like to thank the university for inviting me on this panel. I have so much to say, and I have that 3 minutes. I don't know how I can say 3 minutes, but I will raise the issue of the people of St. Martin, and because of that, Junior tells us that they don't exist in the present system. They don't exist, and he didn't say why. But it's because of we ourselves. Our politicians are not there to represent the people. From the moment you are in politics, and I'm speaking from the perspective of the northern side, from the moment you are in politics, that means that you will be representing the state of France. Mr. University, we are not a colony, but I feel we are a colony since we became a collectivity. Since we became a collectivity, we are a colony. Before, we had the autonomy of a commune. Remember, the colonial society and system never reached St. Martin. It stopped in Guadeloupe. They were organized. After the abolition of slavery, St. Martin people were free. There was no plantation. They were free and they owned the land. They were owners of their land. So we were given an autonomous status that permits us to get up and go Santo Domingo, go to the United States, go everywhere. We did not have to answer to any boss, per se. That is freedom. We didn't realize it. We didn't understand it. And when we became a commune of Guadeloupe in 1946, we continued like that because we were so different, not the same language, not the same culture, not the same history, not the same settlement. The people of St. Martin did not come from the same way those from Guadeloupe. We were built up around the islands, the same people. We were closer to Anguilla, we were closer to St. Eustatius, we were closer to the south side. So those are the characteristics of a people, but it doesn't fall. Those characteristics doesn't fall in what you call a nation in the sense of a European nation. Okay? And I like very much the Republic of St. Martin that tells you we were not we were not a colony, we were a nation throughout our history. And everything okay. So the people doesn't exist, and he says that the collectivity and the country, the collectivity and the country St. Martin are shrinking, and the people weakens, which is true. And the more we go, the people do not exist. So it is our duty as people of St. Martin to restructure what it is a nation. I think it is not just Dutch and French, it is also the people. And the 1648 treaty is about the people. It is not a treaty of cooperation, it is a treaty of cooperation. It defines the condition, how the people has to be there. The natural resources were in common, and we have forgotten that, and we need to devise a system of government, not French or Dutch, and we generally speak in terms of French and Dutch. Even the politicians, we have to unite that. The people cannot be united if the politicians do not devise the structure. And I think we have a lot of work to do. And that structure will not be 2 heads, will be 3 heads. The French laws that we use, the Dutch laws that we use, and the laws of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Jeffrey. As you can see, as time goes by, we have more and more energy. So when the floor is open for debate, you will hear a lot more. Thank you. I would like now to introduce to you Mr. Miguel de Wever. Mr. Miguel de Wever has been functioning as a civil servant in a management position from April 1999. And he is presently the Acting Secretary General of the Ministry of Tourism, Economic Affairs, Traffic and Telecommunication. He was instrumental in developing and building the ministry during the transition period from island territory to country St. Martin. And he was quite popular because in 2012 he even became Man of the Year by the SHTA. Mr. de Wever.
Thank you, I'm glad to be here as well. I think when I read this book, I leave all the formalities, I guess, in the interest of time. When I read this book, I sort of categorized and tried to look for some headings in which my comments will be given, and I kind of focused on 3 areas and then the conclusion. And 1 and then 3 being the political factor, the Dutch factor, and the real factor. Those are the 3 headings and then I go to my conclusion. I'm just going to speak a little fast in the interest of time. When we look at the political factor, I think we have to, understanding as I read the book, understanding why people vote and how they vote, it is important that we understand their modus and their thinking along the lines of where and why they voted in a particular way. And I think we have some categories as examples where we look at, you have those who voted because they wanted, for example, St. Martin, when it comes to, for example, the referendum, the autonomous group, those that wanted more autonomy. Pretty much they wanted more autonomy from the federal government, from the former federal Nellis and cities. We have those that they voted because of their motive being financial, believing that, for example, by voting for separate status, they would pay less taxes or more money would stay on the island. You have those that have a combination of the two above mentioned, but it's also, they were also very much into the issue of trust. And I'll get back to that point later. And then you have those, of course, who vote for independence because it's purely a matter of pride. I think when we look at the issue as was covered in the book with regards to the Dutch factor, I think, of course, there are many things that were said in the book and what the Dutch would say is good governance or not. I think that's something when it comes to our internal affairs, that is certainly something that we would want to, that's our prerogative and our authority. I think we need to probably have more clarity as it relates to what we call and define, how we define the guarantee function in good governance, because I think we can't have it that, depending on who's in the chair, then we are in favor or not in favor with them. But I think at the end of the day, the real factor has a lot to do with trust. And if people trust the way in which the country is run, the decisions that are made, that is what, to me, will serve as a basis to cattle and propel the independence movement. And I think as long as people don't feel trust in the manner in which the country is managed, additionally, that problem is even exacerbated by the fact that there are, political differences in parties, and of course we play in those fears and uncertainties, and I think that prevents also the propel towards independence, and I think that is something, and I think when we look at the issues that's coming out of the book and in the book, when we put solid examples of the reason and the need for independence, then I think people will have trust, and then when we can prove that and show that basically we are doing this in the right way, I think that next step will be able to be easier for us to take. It will be, the motives of others will be exposed, because if we're doing a good job and others have a problem with it, it will be self-evident what their real motive is, and that will also help propel the movement towards an independence in Mali.
Thank you so much, Mr. De Wever. Interesting to see about the three aspects, about the political aspect, the financial aspect, and the socio-economic aspect. I think we will go into that later on in the discussion. Less best, they say. And I'm really proud to announce Mrs. Aldine Bryson-Pantouflet. She was a former director of Milton Peters College, so I'm really proud that she's here and to give a presentation. She's a long-time educator, and Mrs. Aldine Bryson-Pantouflet was recently elected chairwoman of the Social Economic Council, in Dutch, the SEG. Mrs. Bryson is the first woman to serve as head of the SEG St. Martin, as well as the first woman to serve in that post in the Dutch Caribbean. She is the owner of Language for Knowledge, a company which provide courses in the Dutch language for all ages. And she's also a teacher at the moment at USM. Welcome, Mrs. Bryson.
Good evening. First, let me make one point clear. I'm not talking on behalf of the SEG. What I say is for my personal interpretation. So, SEG, I am chairperson of SEG, but today I'm Aldine Pantouflet. I even brought the Bryson because it's really my opinion. I'm very proud to be here, and I thank you for inviting me, for being here. I've always been an admirer of Junior League, but I do have some quarrels with his thinking. Every person, every country, every group of people would look forward to independence. But based on what? Why do we want independence? What is independence? What will happen after independence? I'm talking for the man on the street who doesn't read many newspapers, doesn't read, didn't go to school, doesn't know the whole makeup of politics. And I'm saying 10, 10, 10. What happened 10, 11, 11, 10, 10? Did he feel better? Did the bread cost less? Because that's what it's about. In your book, and I read a couple of them these days, so you said emancipation trust from below. And that is, according to me, lacking on the island. We have to mobilize and sensitize our people to independence. It's a mindset. Independence is a mindset. And as Mr. DeViva said, trust in your leaders. Those are things we also have to do. And pride in your country. What do we have? Do we really have pride in St. Martin? When we talk about St. Martin, do we really feel a warmth in our heart? All of us? And when I mean all of us, I mean all of us who call this place home. I don't care where you come from, but as long as you call this place home, do you have that warm feeling? Do you want to go through with us? Mr. Lake said that St. Martin people, we are not the same people as my parents were. We're not. St. Martin has had a complete makeover. The other day after Gonzalo, I even heard on the radio that somebody said that Gonzalo was our first hurricane. That's how great the turnover is of this country. And still we have the job to mold all these people into one and thrust forward for St. Martin. And until that feeling is in the lower echelons, and the man on the street, everybody, that's when we can talk about going towards independence.
Thank you, Ms. Pontefilet. Well, we heard a lot of different perspectives. We have some mics on your table. I will grab one for Mr. Lake, if you allow me. Turn it on. Because I think it's really interesting to go in a debate, in a dialogue, maybe preferably, about the different perspectives we heard tonight. And I would like to open the floor with a question to Mr. Lake and for the panelists, and you can fill in whatever you want about how optimistic or pessimistic are you in the near future to see an independent unity of St. Martin. Mr. Lake.
Let me start by saying I completely disagree with my good friend and the governor, Roosevelt, that we're not a colony. Anytime you're not in